They say the customer is always right, but at 30,000 feet, power is a dangerous illusion. On a rainy Tuesday at JFK, Flight 902 was supposed to be routine. It became a crime scene of moral bankruptcy. You're about to hear the story of Samuel Henderson, an 82-year-old man stripped of his dignity in front of 200 people, all because he didn't look the part of a first-class passenger. But the flight attendant and the entitled woman who took his seat didn't know one thing. The man sitting in the jump seat, watching the entire humiliating spectacle, wasn't just another crew member. He was the CEO of the airline, and he didn't just fire them. He locked the cabin doors, picked up the intercom, and froze the entire airport's operations to deliver a lesson in justice that the world would never forget. This is the story of the flight that never took off, and the karma that hit harder than a crash landing. The rain was hammering against the reinforced glass of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport. It was a grey, miserable November morning, the kind of weather that makes travel feel like a punishment rather than a privilege. Inside the cabin of Flight 902, bound for London Heathrow, the air was already thick with the humidity of damp coats and the tension of delayed boarding. Samuel Henderson moved slowly down the jet bridge. At 82, his knees weren't what they used to be, and the damp cold settled deep in his joints. He wore a tweed newsboy cap that had seen better days, and a wool coat that was high quality, but clearly dated, perhaps from the late 90s. He carried a single, battered leather satchel. To the casual observer, Samuel looked like a man who might be struggling, a grandfather perhaps traveling on a budget to see family one last time. But appearances, as the crew of Flight 902 would soon learn, are the most dangerous liars of all. Samuel clutched his boarding pass in a hand that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the onset of Parkinson's he had been fighting for 3 years. He stepped onto the plane, greeted by the plastic smile of the head purser, a man named Brett Miller. Brett was in his late 30s, with hair gelled so tight it looked like a helmet, and a uniform that was immaculately pressed. He scanned Samuel's attire with a split-second glance that dripped with judgment. "Welcome aboard," Brett said, his voice automatic, his eyes already looking past Samuel to the younger, wealthier-looking couple behind him. "Economy is down the aisle, to your right." Samuel paused. He looked at Brett, his eyes calm and dark, holding a depth of patience forged in decades of hardship. "Actually, son," Samuel said softly, his voice raspy, "I'm in 1A. Brett's smile faltered. He blinked, finally looking at Samuel rather than through him. He looked at the scuffed leather bag. He looked at the fraying collar of the wool coat. Then he let out a short, incredulous puff of air that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close enough to be insulting. 1A, Brett repeated, loud enough for the business-class passengers already seated to hear. "Sir, 1A is a first-class suite. Are you sure you didn't misread 11A or 21A? "I know my numbers," Samuel said, holding out his ticket. Brett snatched it. He stared at it. It was printed on the airline's heavy stock card, the gold border shimmering under the cabin lights. Samuel Henderson. Seat 1A, first class. Brett frowned. He turned the ticket over, as if looking for the invisible ink that would reveal it was a prank. "Wait here," he muttered, not inviting Samuel in, but leaving him standing in the galley, blocking the boarding flow. Behind Samuel, a voice sharpened by impatience and expensive perfume cut through the noise. "Excuse me, can we move this along? My bag is heavy." Samuel shuffled slightly to the side. Standing there was Felicity Sterling. She was a vision of modern entitlement, head-to-toe designer athleisure, a Louis Vuitton tote on her arm, and a phone pressed to her ear. She was maybe 25, radiant with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. "What is the hold-up?" Felicity snapped, lowering her phone. She looked at Samuel, her nose scrunching slightly. "Oh, is he lost?" Brett looked up from the ticket, his face flushing with the stress of the delay. He made a snap decision, a decision based on bias, on appearance, and on the pressure of a woman who looked like she could get him fired. "There seems to be a system error, Miss Sterling," Brett said, putting on his most charming voice. "This gentleman believes he has seat 1A. "Believes?" Felicity laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "I'm in 1B. My fiancé is supposed to be in 1A, but he missed his connection. I paid for that suite to keep it empty for my bags. I certainly didn't pay to have—" She gestured vaguely at Samuel. "This sitting next to me." Samuel stood tall. He didn't raise his voice. "I purchased the ticket this morning. Full fare." "Full fare?" Felicity scoffed. "That seat costs $12,000. You expect us to believe you have 12 grand in that bag." The line behind them was growing. Passengers were craning their necks. The murmur of irritation was rising. "Sir," Brett said, his voice hardening. "This ticket must be a duplicate printing error. Miss Sterling has reserved the entire row. You're going to have to take a seat in the main cabin. We have a spot in row 42, near the lavatory. It's the only space left." "I am not sitting in row 42, Samuel said. "I paid for 1A. I have the receipt." "I don't have time for this," Brett snapped. He looked at Felicity, who was tapping her foot. "Go take 1A, Miss Sterling. Put your bags there. Sir, give me your bag. I'll check it. You're going to row 42 or you're getting off." Samuel didn't move. He looked Brett in the eye. "You are making a mistake." "The only mistake," Brett hissed, leaning in close, "is thinking you could scam your way into first class on my flight. Now move." The standoff lasted only 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Felicity pushed past Samuel, her shoulder checking him hard enough to make him stumble. She threw her heavy tote bag onto the plush leather of seat 1A, Samuel's seat, and sat down in 1B with a triumphant sigh, immediately returning to her phone call. "Yeah, some homeless-looking guy trying to sneak into first," she said loudly. "It smells like mothballs in here now. Gross." Samuel gripped the handle of his satchel. His knuckles were white. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. A profound, weary disappointment. He looked at Brett. "I will not move to economy. I bought this seat because I need the legroom. I have a medical condition. And I have a flight schedule to keep," Brett shouted, losing his composure completely. He keyed his radio. "Security to the gate. I have a non-compliant passenger refusing crew instructions. Possible fraud." The magic words. Non-compliant. Fraud. Within minutes, the heavy thud of boots echoed on the jet bridge. 2 TSA agents and a private airport security contractor appeared in the doorway. They were large men, already sweating, already on edge. "That's him," Brett pointed at Samuel, like he was identifying a terrorist. "He's holding a fraudulent ticket and refusing to vacate a seat that belongs to another passenger." The lead guard, a man named Officer Davis, didn't ask questions. He didn't ask to see the ticket. He saw an old black man in a ragged coat standing in the first-class galley, and a flight attendant in a uniform pointing an accusatory finger. "Sir, let's go," Davis said, grabbing Samuel's arm. "I have a right to be here," Samuel said, his voice finally cracking with emotion. "Check the computer." "We can discuss it on the tarmac," Davis said. He pulled. Samuel didn't budge easily. He was sturdier than he looked, so the second guard grabbed his other arm. They dragged him. It wasn't a gentle escort. They physically hauled the 82-year-old man backward. His feet dragged on the carpet. His cap fell off, revealing a head of snowy white hair. "My bag!" Samuel cried out as his satchel slipped from his grasp. "We'll bring it!" Brett yelled, kicking the bag aside with his foot. The spectacle was horrifying. The passengers in business class watched in stunned silence. A few pulled out phones. "Hey!" a man in row 4 shouted. "He's an old man. Take it easy." "Stay out of it unless you want to join him," Brett snapped back, drunk on the adrenaline of authority. They dragged Samuel past the first-class suites. Felicity Sterling didn't even look up from her phone. She was busy taking a selfie with a glass of champagne that another flight attendant had hurriedly brought her. As they reached the door, Samuel managed to plant his feet. He looked back at Brett. "You don't know who I am," Samuel said, his breath coming in short gasps. "You really don't know what you've just done." "I know exactly who you are," Brett sneered. "You're a disruption. Get him off my plane." With a final heave, the guards shoved Samuel out onto the jet bridge. He stumbled and fell to his knees on the hard industrial carpet. The door to the aircraft was slammed shut in his face. The locking mechanism clicked, a sound of finality. Inside, Brett straightened his tie. He took a deep breath, smoothing his hair. He turned to the cabin, addressing the shocked faces of the first-class passengers. "Apologies for the disturbance, ladies and gentlemen. Safety is our top priority. We removed a security threat. We will be underway shortly." He walked toward the cockpit to give the cabin secure signal to the pilot. He felt powerful. He felt in control. He had no idea that the man sitting in the cockpit jump seat, the observer who had boarded 20 minutes before anyone else, had just unbuckled his seatbelt. The pilot, Captain James Sterling, no relation to Felicity, purely a coincidence of common names, was going through the pre-flight checklist when the cockpit door opened. He didn't turn around. "Cabin secure, Brett." "Secure, Captain. Had a bit of a situation with a vagrant trying to poach 1A, but security handled it. We're good to push back." "Is that so?" The voice didn't come from the captain. It came from the jump seat behind them. Brett froze. He had forgotten about the observer. When the crew had briefed earlier, they were told a corporate auditor would be riding along in the jump seat. It wasn't uncommon. The man had boarded early, wearing a pilot's uniform with no stripes, a cap pulled low, and sunglasses. He hadn't said a word. He had just sat in the dark corner of the cockpit, reading a manual. Now, that man stood up. He was tall, 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled the cramped space. He took off his cap. He took off his sunglasses. Brett's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. He recognized the face. Every employee in the company recognized that face. It was on the cover of the monthly newsletter. It was in the safety videos. It was Harrison Wolfe, the CEO of Stratos Air. Wolfe was known as the Wolf on Wall Street, a man who had taken a failing regional airline and turned it into a global empire through ruthless efficiency, but more importantly, a fanatical obsession with customer respect. He was a man who famously worked baggage shifts on Thanksgiving just to see how his ground crew was treated. Harrison Wolfe stared at Brett. His eyes were like ice. "Did you just say, a vagrant?" Wolfe asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Mr. Wolfe," Brett stammered. I didn't know you were." "I asked you a question." Wolfe stepped closer, forcing Brett to back up against the instrument panel. "You threw a passenger off this plane. You called him a security threat. Why?" He had a fake ticket, sir. He was dressed poorly. He was disturbing the peace." "Did you verify the ticket in the system?" Wolfe asked. Well, the woman in 1B said the seat was hers, and looking at him, I just assumed." "You assumed," Wolfe repeated. He looked at the captain. "Captain Sterling, did you authorize the removal of a passenger?" "I trusted the purser's assessment of a cabin threat, sir," the captain said, his hands shaking slightly on the throttle. Wolfe nodded slowly. He reached past the captain. He didn't reach for the radio. He reached for the master switch of the aircraft's communication system. "Captain," Wolfe said, "kill the engines." "Sir?" I said, "Kill the engines. Shut it down. APU only." The hum of the engines died. The lights flickered and switched to battery power. The air conditioning vents went silent. A hush fell over the entire plane. Wolf grabbed the cockpit interphone handset. "Open the cockpit door," he ordered. Brett opened it, his hands trembling. Wolf stepped out into the forward galley. He looked at the closed aircraft door where Samuel had been ejected. Then he looked at Felicity Sterling in seat 1B, who was busy reapplying lipstick. Wolf turned to Brett. "Open the main cabin door. Get him back." "Sir, security has him. He's probably halfway to the precinct by now," Brett whimpered. "Then you better start running," Wolf said. Wolf then did something that had never happened in the history of Stratos Air. He picked up the public address system microphone. He didn't use the standard "ladies and gentlemen." "Greeting. This is Harrison Wolf, CEO of Stratos Air." His voice boomed through the cabin, loud and crystal clear. "Nobody is going to London today. Not yet." Every head snapped up. Felicity dropped her lipstick. "I am freezing all operations on this aircraft," Wolf continued. "I am declaring a corporate emergency. We have just witnessed a crime. Not a crime of law, but a crime of humanity. And I am not moving this metal bird 1 inch until justice is served." He looked at Brett, who was now crying silently. "Captain," Wolf said, his voice carrying to the terrified first-class cabin without the mic, "call the tower. Tell them to ground all Stratos outbound flights from Terminal 4. Tell them the CEO is on the tarmac and he's demanding a gate return." "All flights, sir?" the captain gasped. "That will cost millions." Wolf looked at the empty seat in 1A. "I don't care if it costs $1 billion, Wolf said. "Go get my friend." Brett's eyes went wide. "Friend?" Wolf turned on him, his fury finally breaking through the calm surface. "That vagrant you just threw into the dirt? That man is the reason you have a job. That man is the reason this airline exists." Wolf pressed the button to open the main cabin door himself. The wind and rain swept in. "Go get him," Wolf pointed to the jet bridge. "And if he doesn't come back with you, don't bother coming back either." The silence inside a fully boarded Boeing 787 is an unnatural thing. Usually, there is the hum of the auxiliary power unit, the rush of air conditioning, the murmur of hundreds of people settling in. But now, with the systems killed on Harrison Wolf's orders, the silence was heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the drumming of the rain on the fuselage and the confused whispers of passengers wondering why the lights had flickered and died. Inside the cockpit, Captain James Sterling was sweating through his uniform. He had flown for 20 years. He had dealt with bird strikes, engine failures, and unruly passengers. But he had never, ever seen a CEO ground an entire airline's operation from the jump seat. "Tower is asking for a status update, Mr. Wolf," the captain said, his voice trembling as he held the battery-powered radio handset. "They say we are blocking the alley. 3 other aircraft are waiting to push back. They're threatening fines." Harrison Wolf didn't even look at him. He was standing in the doorway of the cockpit, staring down the length of the aisle, his eyes fixed on the empty jet bridge door. "Tell them to wait," Wolf said. "Tell them Flight 902 is a crime scene." Crime scene, sir?" "You heard me." In first class, the atmosphere had shifted from annoyance to fear. People knew who Harrison Wolf was. They knew his reputation. He wasn't the kind of CEO who sat in a glass tower looking at spreadsheets. He was a man who had built Stratos Air from a single cargo plane into a global behemoth. He was known for a temper that could strip paint off a wall, but also for a loyalty that was legendary. And right now, he looked like a man ready to burn his own kingdom to the ground. Felicity Sterling, however, was seemingly immune to the vibe in the room. She was frantically typing on her phone, likely posting a complaint to her 3 million followers. She looked up at Wolf, adjusting her designer sunglasses despite the dim cabin. "Excuse me, Mr. Wolf, is it?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescended annoyance. I don't care about your little corporate power trip. I have a gala in London tonight. If we don't leave in 10 minutes, I'm going to sue this airline for every penny it has." Wolf slowly turned his head. He looked at her with the kind of detachment one might have for a cockroach on a kitchen floor. "Miss Sterling," Wolf said, his voice quiet but carrying effortlessly, "if you say one more word before my guest returns, I will have you banned not just from this airline, but I will personally call the CEOs of Delta, United, and British Airways to ensure you never fly commercial again. Do not test me." Felicity's mouth snapped shut. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear crossed her eyes. She shrank back into her seat, pulling her expensive coat tighter around herself. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, panic was setting in. Brett Miller, the head purser, who had just moments ago felt like a god, was now running. He wasn't walking fast, he was sprinting. His polished shoes slipped on the linoleum of the jet bridge. He burst through the terminal doors, his chest heaving, sweat ruining his pristine makeup. "Where is he?" Brett gasped, grabbing the arm of the gate agent, a young woman named Sarah who looked terrified. "Who?" Sarah asked. "The old man, the one from 1A. Where did security take him?" Sarah pointed toward the end of the concourse, near the heavy steel doors marked TSA Private Screening Area. Officer Davis took him to the holding cell. They said they were going to process him for trespassing and turn him over to the NYPD. "Oh, God," Brett moaned. He took off running again. He reached the security office and pounded on the door. It was locked. He pounded harder, his fist bruising against the metal. "Open up! Open the door!" The door swung open. Officer Davis stood there, a half-eaten donut in one hand, looking annoyed. "What's the problem, flight attendant? We're filling out the paperwork. This guy is stubborn. Won't give us an ID." Brett didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past the large guard into the small, sterile holding room. It was a bleak, windowless box with fluorescent lights that hummed loudly. Sitting on a metal bench, handcuffed to a steel bar on the wall, was Samuel Henderson. He looked smaller now. His coat was dirty from where he had been shoved onto the floor. His newsboy cap was sitting on the table next to the confiscation tray. His head was bowed, his chin resting on his chest. He looked defeated. "Mr. Henderson," Brett wheezed, his voice breaking. Samuel slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. He looked at Brett with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Are you done?" Samuel asked softly. "Can I call my son now? Or is that against the rules, too?" "No, no rules," Brett stammered, fumbling for his keys, then realizing he didn't have the key to the handcuffs. He spun around to Officer Davis. "Uncuff him, now." Davis laughed. "Relax, pal. He's processed. We're waiting for the cops. He's going to central booking." "You don't understand," Brett screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "The man on the plane, the CEO, Mr. Wolf is here. He stopped the flight. He grounded the airport. He wants him back." Davis stopped chewing. "Wolf? Harrison Wolf?" "Yes. And if this man isn't back in seat 1A in 5 minutes, we are all dead. Do you hear me? Dead." The color drained from Davis's face. He dropped the donut. He scrambled for his belt, his fingers fumbling with the keys. The lock clicked. The cuffs fell away. Samuel rubbed his wrists. There were red welts where the metal had dug into his fragile skin. He didn't stand up immediately. He just looked at his wrists, then at Brett. "I paid for my ticket," Samuel whispered. "I just wanted to see London one last time." I know, I'm so sorry." Brett was practically hyperventilating. He reached out to help Samuel up, but Samuel flinched away from his touch. "Don't touch me," Samuel said firmly. He stood up on his own, using the wall for support. He picked up his cap and placed it carefully on his head. He looked at his battered leather satchel, which had been tossed into the corner. "My bag," Samuel said. Brett scrambled to the corner. He picked up the heavy bag. He dusted it off with his own blazer sleeve. "I have it, sir. I have it. Please, we have to go." They walked out of the security office. The walk back to gate B42 was the longest walk of Brett Miller's life. Every step felt like a march to the gallows. He walked a step behind Samuel, carrying the old man's bag like a servant. As they approached the gate, the scene was chaotic. The gate area was flooded with Stratus Air Ground staff, managers, and frantic supervisors. The phones at the desk were ringing off the hook. But when they saw Samuel Henderson emerging from the concourse, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Word had spread. They didn't know who he was, but they knew he was the reason the airport was frozen. Samuel walked onto the jet bridge. The cold air hit him again. He could see the open door of the plane. He could see the dark figure of Harrison Wolfe standing in the galley, waiting. Samuel stopped. He looked at the plane. He looked at Brett. "I don't know if I want to get back on," Samuel said. Brett's heart stopped. If Samuel turned around now, if he refused to board, Brett knew his life was over. "Please," Brett whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please, sir." Samuel sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a century. "I'm not doing it for you, son," he said. "I'm doing it for Harry." And with that, Samuel Henderson stepped back onto Flight 902. The moment Samuel's foot touched the cabin floor, the tension in the air shattered. Harrison Wolfe, the iron-willed titan of industry, the man who made grown executives weep in boardrooms, moved with a speed that startled everyone. He didn't just walk toward Samuel, he rushed to him. Wolfe dropped to one knee. It was a gesture of such profound submission and respect that a collective gasp went through the first-class cabin. The CEO of the airline was kneeling on the floor of the galley, right in front of the lavatory door, looking up at the man who had just been treated like garbage. "Sam," Wolfe said, his voice choked with emotion. "Sam, I am so sorry." Samuel looked down at the billionaire. He reached out a trembling hand and patted Wolfe's cheek. "Get up, Harry," Samuel said, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "You're ruining your suit pants. Those cost more than my first house." Wolfe stood up and pulled the frail old man into a crushing hug. He held him for a long time, eyes squeezed shut. When Wolfe pulled away, there was a fire in his eyes that could have burned the world down. He took the battered leather satchel from Brett's shaking hands. "Get to the jump seat," Wolfe growled at the purser. "And stay there. Do not speak. Do not look at the passengers. Just sit and pray." Brett fled to the crew seat, buckling himself in as if the plane were about to crash. Wolfe then turned to the cabin. He guided Samuel to seat 1A. Felicity Sterling was watching this with her mouth open. Her bag was still occupying the seat. "Move it," Wolfe said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The command was absolute. Felicity scrambled. She yanked her Louis Vuitton tote off the seat so fast she broke a fingernail. She pulled it into her lap, clutching it like a shield. Wolfe gently helped Samuel sit down. He took Samuel's coat, folding it with the care one would give to the Shroud of Turin, and placed it in the overhead bin. He handed Samuel a bottle of water from the galley, cracking the seal himself. "Are you hurt?" Wolfe asked quietly. "Just my pride, Harry. And my wrists a little." Samuel rubbed them. Wolfe saw the red marks. His jaw tightened. A vein throbbed in his temple. He stood up and faced the passengers. He stood in the center of the aisle, between 1A and 1B. He looked at the faces peering back at him, the wealthy, the elite, the frequent flyers. "I want you all to look at this man," Wolfe said, gesturing to Samuel. The cabin was silent. "You see an old man in a cheap coat," Wolfe began, his voice rising. "You see someone who doesn't fit in first class. You saw a nuisance. You saw a reason to roll your eyes and check your watches. He looked directly at Felicity. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "Let me tell you who you threw off my plane," Wolf continued. 50 years ago, Stratus Air didn't exist. I was 22 years old. I was a mechanic with a dream and a bankruptcy filing. I had one plane, a rusted DC-3 that couldn't fly. No bank would touch me. No investor would look at me. Wolf placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "This man," Wolf said, "was the head mechanic at the airfield where I swept floors. He wasn't rich. He had 5 kids to feed. He drove a 20-year-old truck. But every Friday for 3 years, he put $20 in a coffee can." Wolf paused, letting the words sink in. "When the bank came to repossess my plane, Samuel Henderson walked into my office. He put that coffee can on my desk. Inside was $3,000. It was his life savings. It was his retirement. It was everything he had." A woman in row 3 covered her mouth. The silence in the cabin was now one of shame. "He told me, 'I believe in you, Harry. Make it fly.' That money bought the parts to fix the engine. That plane flew its first cargo run 2 days later. That run paid for the next. And the next." Wolf looked around the luxurious cabin, the leather seats, the gold trim, the mood lighting. "Every single thing you see around you," Wolf said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Every seat, every engine, every paycheck, every mile we fly, it all belongs to him. Samuel Henderson isn't just a passenger. He is the soul of this company. He owns 15% of Stratus Air, but he has never once asked for a free flight. He has never asked for a favor. Today he bought a ticket to visit his grandson in London. He paid full price." Wolf turned his gaze back to Felicity Sterling. "And you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You treated the man who built the seat you're sitting in like he was trash." Felicity tried to rally. She was cornered, and like many entitled people, she chose aggression over apology. "I didn't know," she snapped, her voice shrill. "How was I supposed to know? He looks like a nobody. And anyway, I paid for my ticket too. You can't talk to me like this. I'm a platinum member." "Not anymore," Wolf said instantly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen 3 times. "I just revoked your status. I just cancelled your return ticket. And I am refunding your fare for this flight." "You can't do that," Felicity shrieked. "I can do whatever I want," Wolf said calmly. "It's my plane, and right now you are trespassing." "Trespassing? I want you off," Wolf said. "You're kicking me off?" Felicity stood up, her face red with shock. "You're kicking a 25-year-old woman off a plane in the rain to make room for him?" "No," Wolf corrected her. "He already has his seat. I'm kicking you off because you don't share the values of this airline. And frankly, I don't want your money." Wolf pointed to the door. "Get your bags. The security team that escorted Mr. Henderson out is waiting for you. And I suggest you go quietly, or I will have them drag you exactly the way they dragged him." Felicity looked around the cabin for support. "Is anyone going to do anything? This is insanity." But nobody moved. The man in 4A, who had shouted earlier, looked at her and shook his head. "Go on, lady. Walk of shame." "Yeah, get off," another passenger yelled from the back. The tide had turned. The mob that had silently judged Samuel was now loudly judging her. Felicity grabbed her bag. She was shaking with rage and humiliation. She stormed past Wolf, slamming her shoulder into his, though he didn't budge an inch. She marched to the door, where Officer Davis was waiting, looking sheepish and eager to please the CEO. "Escort her out," Wolf ordered. "And Davis?" "Yes, Mr. Wolf." "Make sure she waits for her checked luggage in the rain. No VIP lounge." "Yes, sir." As Felicity disappeared down the jet bridge, Wolf turned back to the cabin. He looked at Brett, who was shivering in the jump seat. "We're not done yet," Wolf said. He picked up the intercom handset again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Harrison Wolf. We will be departing shortly. I apologize for the delay. But before we go, there is one more change to the crew manifest." He looked at Brett. "Mr. Miller," Wolf said, his voice echoing through the speakers. "You have been with Stratos Air for 12 years. You are trained to spot security threats. But today, you decided that poverty was a threat. You decided that age was a threat. You judged a book by its cover, and you failed the most basic test of humanity." Brett sobbed openly now, his face buried in his hands. "I am not going to fire you, Mr. Miller," Wolf said. Brett looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Firing you would be too easy," Wolf said coldly. "You clearly have forgotten what it's like to struggle. You've forgotten what it feels like to be at the bottom. So we're going to remind you." Wolf unclipped his own gold CEO pin from his lapel. "You are demoted, effective immediately. You are no longer a purser. You are no longer cabin crew. Upon landing in London, you will report to the ground operations team." Wolf leaned in close to Brett, so only he could hear the final blow. "You're going to cleaning crew, Brett. You're going to scrub the toilets of these planes for the next 6 months. And if you quit, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I'll blacklist you so hard, you won't be able to get a job driving a baggage cart." Wolf stood up straight. "Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, sir," Brett whispered. "Thank you, sir." Wolf nodded. He turned to the cockpit. "Captain Sterling?" "Yes, Mr. Wolf." "Restart the engines. Get us to London. I'm buying drinks for the whole plane." The cabin erupted in applause. It started slow, then grew into a roar. Samuel sat in seat 1A, looking overwhelmed. He reached out and took Wolf's hand as the CEO sat down in the empty seat 1B, the seat Felicity had vacated. "You didn't have to do all that, Harry," Samuel said softly. Wolf buckled his seatbelt. He looked at his old friend, his mentor, the man who had saved him. "Yes, I did, Sam." Wolf smiled, and for the first time it was genuine. "Now tell me, how are the grandkids?" The Atlantic Ocean is vast, but news travels faster than sound. While Flight 902 was cruising at 37,000 feet, wrapped in the comfortable hum of the Rolls-Royce engines, a digital storm was brewing on the ground, one that would destroy lives and build legends before the landing gear even touched the tarmac at Heathrow. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin, the mood was somber but warm. The earlier tension had evaporated, replaced by a reverence for the 2 men in the front row. Harrison Wolf had ordered the crew to stop serving him. Instead, he spent the first 2 hours of the flight serving Samuel. He poured the tea himself. He cut Samuel's steak into bite-sized pieces when he noticed the older man's hands shaking too violently to manage the knife. "You don't have to baby me, Harry," Samuel chuckled, though his eyes were wet. "I changed your diapers, metaphorically speaking, when you were a 20-something idiot trying to fix a fuel pump with duct tape." "And you saved my life doing it," Wolf replied, taking a sip of water. "Sam, why didn't you call me? Why did you buy a ticket? You have a lifetime pass. You have my personal number." Samuel looked out the window at the endless blue horizon. "I didn't want to be a burden. You're a big shot now, CEO of Stratos, Man of the Year. I'm just an old mechanic who can't hold a wrench anymore." He tapped his trembling fingers on the armrest. "The Parkinson's is getting worse, Harry. The doctors say I shouldn't travel alone. But my grandson, Marcus, he's graduating from Oxford tomorrow. I promised him I'd be there. I promised my Mary, before she passed, that I'd see the boy get his degree." Wolf felt a lump form in his throat. The vagrant he had saved wasn't just travelling for leisure. He was on a final, desperate mission to keep a promise to his dead wife. "You'll see him," Wolf vowed. "And you won't just see him. You're going to sit front row. I'll buy the damn university if I have to." While this quiet moment of humanity was unfolding in the sky, hell was breaking loose in New York. Felicity Sterling was sitting in the back of a generic taxi. She couldn't get an Uber Black because her credit card had been declined, thanks to Wolf's immediate refund processing, which triggered a fraud alert on her bank account. She was furious. She was wet. She was humiliated. But Felicity belonged to a generation that believed truth is whatever you can edit into a 60-second clip. She pulled out her phone. She opened TikTok. She hit record. She forced tears into her eyes, a skill she had perfected over years of manipulative dating. "Guys," she sniffled, looking into the camera with practiced vulnerability. "I am literally shaking right now. I was just assaulted on a plane. Stratos Air. I can't even. This crazy old man attacked me, tried to steal my seat, and when I asked for help, the CEO, Harrison Wolf, physically dragged me off the plane because he's, like, friends with the attacker. It was so scary. I'm stranded at JFK in the rain. Please share this. We need to hold these toxic men accountable." She posted it. Caption: "Kyrngos trauma, Ashashas Stratos Air, Tanjos boycott, Tashasas assault." Within 10 minutes, it had 50,000 views, her comment section filled with sympathy. "OMG, you poor thing. Cancel Stratos. Harrison Wolf is a monster." For an hour, Felicity felt the rush of victory. She was controlling the narrative. She was the victim. She would get a settlement. She would get a TV interview. But she had forgotten one critical detail. There were 200 other people on that plane, and most of them had 5G data before takeoff. The passenger in seat 4A, a quiet tech entrepreneur named David, had recorded the entire incident. He hadn't just recorded the aftermath, he had recorded the confrontation. He had recorded Felicity sneering about the smell of mothballs. He had recorded Wolf's speech about the coffee can. He had recorded Felicity screaming, "He looks like a nobody." David uploaded his video to Twitter X with a simple caption: "The truth about Flight 902. Harrison Wolf is a hero. The girl in 1B is the villain of the year. The internet does not sleep, and the internet loves justice." The two videos collided in the digital arena. Felicity's tearful confession was suddenly being stitched side by side with the raw footage of her entitlement. The contrast was brutal. Net sleuth. Wait, she said the old man attacked her? The video shows him standing there silently, while she calls him gross. She's lying. Justice warrior. Did you hear the CAO? That old man founded the company with his life savings, and she threw his bag? Karma police. I found her. Felicity Sterling. Influencer. She has a partnership with L'Oreal and Revolve. Not for long. The tide turned with the force of a tsunami. In the taxi, Felicity's phone began to buzz, not with likes, but with hate. Thousands of comments. Liar. Racist. Entitled brat. Then, the emails started coming. Revolve clothing. Subject, termination of partnership. Dear Felicity, in light of recent footage. L'Oreal PR. Subject, immediate contract suspension. Her talent agency. Subject, we are dropping you, Felicity screamed. She screamed so loud the taxi driver swerved. She tapped frantically on her screen, deleting comments, blocking users. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a spoon. Her follower count was dropping by the second. 10,000 lost, 50,000 lost, 100,000 lost. She had tried to destroy an old man's dignity for a seat. Instead, she had destroyed her own career before she even reached Manhattan. Meanwhile, high above the Atlantic, Brett Miller was staring at his reflection in the lavatory mirror. He looked at the purser wings pinned to his chest, the wings he had worked 12 years to earn, the wings that symbolized his authority, his status. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he unpinned them. He placed them on the counter. He looked at his face. He looked older. The fear of God had been put into him, but more than that, the shame was eating him alive. He replayed the moment he kicked the bag. He replayed the way he had looked at Samuel. Why did I do that? He asked himself. When did I become this person? He realized with a sinking heart that the uniform had become a costume for his ego. He had used the rules to bully the weak, and now he was the weak. The plane began its descent into London Heathrow. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing," the captain's voice announced. Brett walked out into the cabin for the final safety check. He couldn't look the passengers in the eye. He felt their stares. They knew. Everyone knew. As the plane taxied to the gate, Harrison Wolfe stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He turned to Samuel. "Ready to go, partner?" "I'm ready, Harry." Samuel smiled. The jet bridge connected. The door opened. But this time, it wasn't the usual rush to exit. The Stratos Air Station manager for London, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, boarded the plane immediately. She was flanked by 2 ground crew members holding a pile of blue fabric. She nodded respectfully to Wolfe, then turned her eyes to Brett. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice clip and professional. "Mr. Wolfe messaged ahead." Brett swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. The rest of the crew will disembark and head to the hotel," Mrs. Higgins said. "You will remain on board." She gestured to the ground crew. One of them stepped forward and handed Brett the bundle. It was a heavy, industrial-grade jumpsuit. Bright blue, stained with grease from previous shifts. On the back, it said, "Sanitation." "You are to change immediately," Mrs. Higgins ordered in front of the entire departing business class. "The cleaning crew is short-staffed today. You will start with the aft lavatories. They are reportedly quite blocked." The passengers filing out witnessed this final act of judgment. Brett took the jumpsuit. His hands shook. He looked at Wolfe, hoping for a reprieve, a last-minute, "Just kidding." Wolfe looked back at him, his face stone-cold. "Character is built in the trenches, Brett. Make it shine." Wolfe took Samuel's arm and led him off the plane, walking into the terminal like a king and his emperor. Behind them, Brett Miller, the man who thought he was too good for a wrinkled coat, unbuttoned his pristine white shirt, put on the stained blue coveralls, and picked up a toilet brush. The hard karma wasn't just losing a job, it was living the reality he had scorned. The rain in London was different than the rain in New York. In New York it had been cold, biting, and miserable. But as Samuel Henderson stepped out of the private terminal at Heathrow, the English drizzle felt soft, almost cleansing. He didn't walk out alone, and he certainly didn't walk to a bus stop. A convoy of 3 black Range Rovers was waiting on the tarmac, their engines idling with a low growl. A team of security agents, far more professional than the ones at JFK, held umbrellas over Samuel's head as he descended the stairs of the aircraft. Harrison Wolfe walked beside him, his hand gently resting on the older man's elbow. "You really don't have to do this, Harry," Samuel said, eyeing the convoy. "A cab would have been fine." "A cab?" Wolfe scoffed, opening the rear door of the lead vehicle himself. "You're the co-founder of Stratos Air, Sam. You don't take cabs. You take motorcades." They sped toward Oxford, leaving the chaos of the airport behind. Inside the quiet luxury of the car, Samuel looked at his hands. They were still trembling, but less so now. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by a deep, vibrating anticipation. "Do you think he'll recognize me?" Samuel asked quietly. "I haven't seen Marcus in 3 years, not since Mary's funeral. Video calls aren't the same." Wolfe smiled. "Sam, you're the man who taught him to ride a bike. You're the man who sent him his first model airplane. He'll recognize you. The Sheldonian Theatre at Oxford University is a place of history, gravity, and pomp. It was filled to the rafters with proud parents, distinguished professors, and eager graduates in their flowing black gowns. Samuel and Wolfe entered quietly through a side door. Wolfe had pulled a few strings, as billionaires tend to do, to secure seats in the front row of the balcony, offering a perfect view of the stage without drawing attention to themselves. When the ceremony began, Samuel leaned forward, gripping the railing. He scanned the sea of faces, his eyes squinting behind his glasses. "There," Wolfe whispered, pointing. Samuel followed the finger. In the third row, sitting tall and proud, was Marcus. He looked so much like his grandmother. He had the same sharp jawline, the same kind eyes. "Marcus Henderson," the dean announced from the podium, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in aeronautical engineering. Samuel let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a lifetime. Tears streamed freely down his weathered cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. Marcus walked across the stage to accept his diploma. He shook the dean's hand. But then, instead of returning to his seat, he asked for the microphone. This was unplanned. The audience murmured. Marcus looked up at the balcony. He couldn't see Samuel in the shadows, but he knew. He knew because Wolfe had sent him a text message 5 minutes ago. "Look up." He kept his promise. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the ancient hall. "I know this is unorthodox, but I wouldn't be standing here today without one person." The room went silent. "My grandfather is a mechanic," Marcus said. "He spent 50 years fixing things that other people broke. He has grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing will ever remove. He lives in a small apartment in Queens. He drives a car that's older than I am." Marcus paused, fighting back emotion. "But every book I read, every class I took, every meal I ate here, he paid for it. He told me he was using his pension. He told me he was managing. I found out today that he was doing a lot more than managing." Marcus looked directly at the balcony. "He taught me that you don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be rich to be generous. And you don't need to be in the cockpit to fly the plane. Grandpa, this is for you." Marcus raised his diploma high in the air. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous ovation. Samuel buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs of pure joy. Wolfe put an arm around him, patting his back firmly. Later that afternoon, at a private reception Wolfe had organized at a nearby hotel, the three men sat together. Marcus was still in his gown, holding a glass of champagne. Samuel was sipping tea. "There's one more thing," Wolfe said, placing a leather portfolio on the table. "What's this?" Samuel asked. "You remember the coffee can, Sam?" Wolfe asked. "The $3,000 you gave me in 1974? "I remember," Samuel nodded. "Best investment I ever made. Kept you out of jail." "Well," Wolfe opened the portfolio. "We structured that as an equity buy-in. You owned 15% of the original company. Over the years, through mergers and public offerings, your shares were diluted, but they never went away. And since you never cashed a single dividend check, we just reinvested them." Wolfe slid a document across the table. It was a bank statement. Samuel picked it up. He adjusted his glasses. He read the number. He read it again. "Harry," Samuel whispered. "Is this a decimal point error?" "No error, Sam," Wolfe grinned. "That's $142 million dollars." Samuel dropped the paper. He looked at Marcus, then at Wolfe. I can't. It's yours," Wolfe said. "It always was. You lived on a mechanic's pension because you're a stubborn old mule who didn't want to flash money. But you don't have to worry about the rent anymore, Sam." Samuel looked at Marcus. "Boy," he said, his voice stern, but his eyes twinkling. "It looks like you're going to have to start your own airline. We have the capital." While Samuel was discovering his fortune, the world was exacting its price on those who had wronged him. Felicity Sterling didn't just lose her sponsors. 2 days after the incident, Stratos Air's legal team filed a lawsuit against her for defamation and disruption of corporate operations. The video evidence was irrefutable. She was ordered to pay significant damages. Bankrupt and socially exiled, she was last seen working as a receptionist at a mid-tier gym in New Jersey, where she is strictly forbidden from using her phone on shift. Brett Miller, the former purser, did not quit. To everyone's surprise, he stuck it out. For 6 months, he cleaned toilets, he scrubbed floors, he was humbled daily. But something changed in him. The other cleaners, many of them immigrants, many of them older, took him in. They shared their lunches with him. They told him their stories. Brett realized that the people he had looked down on were, in fact, the backbone of the world. 1 year later, Harrison Wolfe would promote Brett back to the cabin, not as a purser, but as a junior attendant. Brett accepted it with gratitude. He became known as the kindest crew member in the fleet, the one who always helped the elderly with their bags, the one who never judged a book by its cover. The story ends where it began, at an airport. Samuel Henderson, now 83, sat in the Stratos Air lounge at Heathrow, waiting for his flight back to New York. He wasn't wearing the old wool coat anymore. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored suit that Marcus had bought him, but on his head he still wore the battered newsboy cap. He watched the planes taking off through the glass. A young couple walked by, looking lost. They were dressed simply, carrying heavy backpacks. "Excuse me," the young woman asked Samuel. "Do you know where gate B12 is?" Samuel smiled. He didn't look through them. He looked at them. "It's just down the hall to the left," he said warmly. "Have a safe flight." "Thank you, sir," the young man said. "I like your hat." "Thank you, son." Samuel tipped the brim. "It reminds me of where I came from." As they walked away, Samuel picked up his tea. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a legend. And as long as Stratos Air flew, the spirit of the man in seat 1A, the man who bought a ticket with dignity and paid with loyalty, would never be grounded. In a world obsessed with status, Samuel Henderson reminded us that true class isn't about the price of your ticket. It's about the content of your character. Harrison Wolfe didn't just save a passenger, he saved the soul of his company. And Felicity? Well, she learned the hard way that when you try to step on others to get to the top, you usually end up falling the furthest. If this story moved you, if you believe that respect should be the default and not a luxury, do me a favor. Hit that like button to help spread this message. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real and it is watching. And if you want more stories where the good guys win and justice is served cold, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. I'll see you in the next one.